Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Philip Emeagwali. The fundamental problem of supercomputing was to discover how to solve the toughest problems arising in mathematics, science, and engineering, and to discover how to solve those grand challenge problems across an ensemble of processors that were identical to each other and that shared nothing between each other, with each processor operating its own operating system. The latter was the biggest scientific question in the unknown world of the supercomputer. The concrete, measurable, and visible proof that I was in the terra incognita, or in the unexplored territory of the supercomputer, was that it made the news headlines that I experimentally parallel processed and communicated across a new internet. After my invention of practical parallel processing, I became well known, but not known well. That is, many knew Philip Emeagwali as an inventor, but few understood his invention. It's easier to recognize my face than to understand my abstract contributions to mathematics, physics, and computer science. Who is Philip Emeagwali? I am the computational mathematician that contributed to a greater understanding of how to execute the fastest floating point calculations of arithmetic. I am the research mathematician who figured out how to solve the largest system of equations of algebra that must be solved to discover and recover otherwise elusive crude oil and natural gas. I am the mathematician that invented new partial differential equations of the calculus of extreme scaled petroleum reservoir simulation. For those reasons, I said that I am well known as a supercomputer scientist that contributed to the development of the computer, but I am not known well as a mathematician that contributed to mathematics. It's easier to understand that I contributed to the modern computer or to the modern supercomputer that's an internet than to understand my contributions to computational mathematics and even computational physics. Most people think calculus is difficult to understand. The invention of the fastest computer is easier to recall than the invention of the most advanced expression in calculus that in turn is the recurring decimal in nearly all the workloads of supercomputers. A 12-year-old writing a school report, a school inventor report on Philip Emeagwali, cannot explain to her teacher how the new 9 partial differential equations that I contributed to calculus is more accurate than the previous equations in textbooks. On the other hand, she could explain my contributions to the development of the supercomputer, that is a new internet. The technology called practical parallel processing that I discovered on the 4th of July 1989 was called a grand challenge for a good reason. Because it was a once impossible problem that was in the realm of science fiction. The machinery was abandoned by 25,000 supercomputer scientists that were only at home with scalar and vector processing. I was the only full-time programmer of the 1980s that was at the frontier of the most massively parallel supercomputers. In the 1980s, attempting to harness 64 binary thousand processors and to use them to solve the biggest scientific challenges evoked a sense of foreboding. In the 1980s, harnessing 1 billion processors that defined and outlined a massively parallel supercomputer and using them to solve a grand challenge problem was as science fiction as sending an astronaut to planet Mars. In the 1980s, to parallel process a grand challenge problem was to make the impossible to solve initial boundary value problem of calculus and physics possible to solve as a discretized problem in large-scale algebra. The reason I parallel processed alone was that I was the only person with the confidence to do so. In the 1970s and 80s, practical parallel supercomputing across a new internet that was a new global network of 65,536 processors was like shooting at as many birds in the dark. I parallel processed to discover speeds in computation and communication that were previously unseen and that made the news headlines in 1989. Supercomputer scientists that had seen me daily in the 1980s first read about my discovery of practical parallel supercomputing and read about it in newspapers instead of hearing about my discovery from me. For me, as a lone supercomputer scientist, breaking the speed records in both computation and communication, and breaking those records alone, and breaking those records for the first time, and breaking those records with a parallel processing machinery was the metaphorical equivalence of being the first solo mountain climber that climbed to the peak of Mount Everest. The significance of reaching the top of Mount Everest and being the first person to reach it was an achievement in geographical exploration that redefined the boundary of the reachable regions of the earth. I was in the news headlines because I was the first lone wolf supercomputer scientist to climb to the peak of the Mount Everest of massively parallel supercomputing across a new ensemble of 65,536 tightly coupled commodity off-the-shelf processors that shared nothing between each other and that were equal distances apart from each other.
insightful and brilliant lecture.